Welcome to Animal Attacks, and for today's video, we're diving into the most unhinged, stomach-dropping moments of people getting eaten by animals on the clock. From a billionaire who thought it was funny to lock a man in a room with a Bengal tiger, to a research assistant who fatally skipped a safety step in a primate enclosure. But before we get to boardrooms and cages, we're starting somewhere a lot more scenic. A river restaurant plagued by crocodiles. It was March 18th, 2016, at a riverside seafood restaurant perched along the Adelaide River in the Northern Territory, Australia. And the last thing Ethan Dury's co-workers expected to remember from that shift was the sound his hands made scraping across the deck boards. Ethan was 28, born in Cairns, raised mostly by his mother after his father left when he was 11. He had been working the restaurant floor for nearly 3 years longer than most staff lasted in that heat. Regulars asked for his section. Now here's a little insight. I've read up on him. His manager described him to investigators afterward as the kind of employee you stop worrying about, which is a specific kind of compliment that also means nobody was watching him closely. He had enrolled in a culinary program starting the following February. The restaurant work was purely financial. Every shift was a semester payment, every tip a textbook. He had 7 months left to save. At dusk, the Adelaide River appears calm, but it is one of the most dangerous crocodile habitats in the world. Massive saltwater crocodiles inhabit these busy waterways, often lurking near boat ramps and docks. Rather than chasing prey, they remain motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Adults in this stretch of the river routinely exceed 14 feet and weigh upward of 1,100 pounds. And if you're anything like me, you'd probably underestimate that water too, and that's exactly what makes it so dangerous. The restaurant's deck extended roughly 8 feet over the waterline. Before you raise your eyebrow on how questionable that is, especially with the aforementioned crocodiles, the restaurant staff has a protocol that they follow. Staff orientation materials and signage posted at 3 points along the railing stated explicitly that employees were not to reach past the outer rail for any reason, and that a designated retrieval pole was stored near the service station for objects that fell to the exterior support beams. At approximately 6:40 p.m., during the peak of dinner service, a customer at a deckside table knocked a folded cloth napkin off the edge. It caught on a diagonal support beam, approximately 2 feet below and outside the railing. Visible, reachable, just far enough to require leaning past the barrier. The retrieval pole was roughly 15 feet away at the service station. Ethan looked at the napkin, looked at the table, and stepped onto the lower rail, braced himself against the railing, and leaned his upper body past the barrier to reach for it. A tourist seated 2 tables away watched after another diner mentioned seeing crocodiles near the dock earlier that evening. We've all taken little shortcuts before, and that's why this decision feels painfully human instead of unbelievable. The crocodile appeared from the shadows beneath the deck. There was no visible approach. One moment, the water below showed a faint circular disturbance, the kind that other diners had been attributing to fish, and then the animal exploded upward with a force that visibly shook the deck structure. It seized Ethan across the lower torso and chest in a single motion, both jaws closing simultaneously. The compression was immediate. His feet, 2 co-workers who had been watching from inside the rail, lunged forward and grabbed his wrists, but the crocodile's weight and momentum pulled him downward and outward before they could establish any real grip. Diners screamed and moved back from the railing. The crocodile immediately began rolling beneath the deck. The whole sequence, from the strike to silence, was under 40 seconds. The restaurant manager called emergency services. Within approximately 2 minutes of the attack, local police and wildlife officers arrived roughly 20 minutes later. Recovery operations, conducted with spotlights and flat-bottom boats, continued for several hours. Ethan's body was recovered that night. Death was attributed to catastrophic crush trauma and acute hemorrhage consistent with large crocodilian bite to the thoracic and abdominal region. Several days later, family co-workers, and longtime customers gathered for a quiet funeral in Cairns. Imagine that. Ethan Dury spent 3 years working a restaurant deck to fund a future in a professional kitchen. He died on that same deck because he saved 30 seconds. That is genuinely one of the cruelest ironies I've seen. A young man whose entire trajectory was built around working hard the right way, undone in a single moment by the one shortcut that didn't forgive him. Now, Ethan made a choice, even if it was a small, stupid one. He climbed over that railing himself. The next guy didn't make any choice at all. He just walked into a meeting room. It was September 11th, 2018, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Emil Cherny had flown 14 hours to sit across from men who smiled too long and answered questions too smoothly. And by the time he was escorted down a marble corridor toward what they called the presentation suite, something about the temperature of the air made the back of his neck tighten. Emil was 43, born in Brno, and had spent nearly 2 decades evaluating infrastructure deals across Central Europe and the Gulf. His colleagues described him as the kind of person who read the footnotes first. Before the trip, he had flagged discrepancies in the company's environmental compliance filings and privately told his firm's legal team he was not yet convinced the partnership should proceed. He had dealt with executives who treated due diligence as an inconvenience before, and he believed he could read a room. I respect people like Emil because they don't cut corners, and it's infuriating knowing where that got him. The presentation suite was soundproofed, climate-controlled, and seated 12. Now, normally, a Bengal tiger is not a creature that announces itself through a door. Adults weigh between 400 and 550 pounds, carry a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch, and are capable of generating bursts of speed up to 40 miles per hour across short distances. They are not slow, they are not dull, and they do not require a running start. The executives had intended for Emil to encounter what they believed was a heavily sedated tiger for a few terrifying moments before revealing the animal, and the locked room had all been part of a cruel practical joke. However, what the executives believed was a sedated animal borrowed from a wealthy associate who kept it on a private compound northeast of the city was, based on veterinary analysis conducted after the fact, never adequately anesthetized. I have read about reckless deaths, I have written about them, but there is a specific category of horror reserved for a death that was engineered as entertainment, and this one sits in that category alone. I genuinely can't wrap my head around how anyone could think this was supposed to be funny. The executives, watching through a live security feed in an adjacent room, saw Emil enter. They saw the concealed crate panel slide open from a remote trigger. The tiger emerged low and slow, and the men laughed. Someone made a comment about Emil's posture. Emil backed toward the door, pressing his hand flat against it, then his palm. The door did not open. The electronic lock, triggered to seal the room as part of what they had planned as a controlled, brief encounter, had malfunctioned. The release command produced no response. Emil hit the door with his fist. He hit it again. Outside, in a soundproofed corridor, no one heard anything. The tiger stopped being slow approximately 90 seconds after leaving the crate. Security footage shows it orienting fully toward Emil at roughly the 2-minute mark, its tail dropping level. Emil was pressed into the corner beside the door, his body turned sideways, one arm raised. The tiger covered the distance between them in under 3 seconds. The impact knocked him into the wall and then the floor. He attempted to rise once, partially, before the animal clamped onto his throat with full jaw engagement. Emil stopped moving after that. What it shows is the tiger maintaining the bite hold while the executives in the adjacent room begin shouting at each other and then at the security team. I'm not going to be gentle about what I think of those men because, well, I don't think they deserve gentleness. They are the reason this happened. Full stop. Police and a veterinary specialist team arrived 18 minutes later. Entry was forced through a secondary access panel. The tiger was euthanized on site. The coroner's report recorded Emil's death as compressive asphyxiation and cervical vascular disruption secondary to large felid bite with associated blunt force trauma to the thorax and cranium. Death was estimated to have occurred within 4 to 6 minutes of the initial bite engagement. Multiple executives were subsequently charged under Saudi law with illegal wildlife possession and negligent homicide. The recorded footage was never released to the public. Proceedings remained ongoing as of late 2019. To me, this wasn't some bizarre accident. It was the predictable end result of powerful people treating a living predator like a toy and a human life like a punchline. And it sucks that Emil died for entertainment. But on the flip side, at least the next victim was doing something real. It was July 9th, 2015 in the Gulf of Mexico. For Joren Israel, it was just another routine inspection on a dive that shouldn't have been complicated. A fact that makes the events of 10:22 a.m. so brutally senseless. Joren was 36, a commercial surface supply diver with 11 years in the industry, most of them spent on deep water inspection contracts along the Gulf Shelf. He earned well above 6 figures annually, which sounds like a lot until you understand what the job actually requires of a human body. His wife and 2 daughters lived outside Baton Rouge. He had 9 days left on a 3-week rotation. To me, no paycheck is ever going to sound big enough for what this job asks of people. The platform's southeast leg assembly had flagged a potential crack in an underwater structural weld during an earlier ROV pass, and Joren had been assigned the direct inspection, a 40-foot descent to manually assess the weld line and document its condition. It was not a complicated dive by commercial diving standards. Plus, he had completed this dozens of times. Now, the Gulf of Mexico's offshore platforms function unintentionally as artificial reefs. The legs and cross members accumulate barnacles, corals, and small fish, which attract larger fish, which attract apex predators. Bull sharks are among the most consistently documented large predators near Gulf platforms. They are not deep water animals. They operate in exactly the kind of shallow, turbid, structure-adjacent water that surrounds the lower sections of an offshore rig. Adults average 7 to 8 feet and exceed 300 pounds. Their bite force is among the highest of any shark species relative to body size. The maintenance crew had been hydroblasting the platform's lower structure for 2 days prior to Joren's dive, and that work had suspended particulate into the water column, reducing visibility at depth to roughly 3 feet. Joren descended on umbilical, maintaining continuous communication with dive control. His audio checks were normal. He located the weld site and began his inspection at approximately 10:22 a.m. His communications became abruptly incoherent, not shouting initially, but a sharp, pressured sound followed by heavy breathing and movement noise on the line. Out of nowhere, a bull shark, estimated afterward at 8 to 9 feet based on wound measurements, struck from Joren's right side in near zero visibility. The bite landed on his right thigh above the knee. The shark immediately maintained its grip while shaking its head violently from side to side. The femoral artery was likely severed in the attack. Dive Control later described the communication channel in those seconds as filled with sounds they could not fully account for: friction, pressure, something rhythmic and wrong. I've read descriptions from other commercial divers about what it's like to hear a teammate through that channel during a critical incident, and every one of them says the sound stays with you. The shark released, circled, and returned within approximately 90 seconds. The second bite took Joren's right shoulder and upper torso. By this point, the blood displacement around him would have been significant enough to cloud several feet of already low visibility water. Dive Control ordered immediate recovery. Standby divers entered the water. He lost consciousness before the standby team reached him. He was at the surface within 6 minutes of the initial strike. The medevac helicopter arrived 45 minutes later. He was pronounced dead on board. Primary cause of death was attributed to exsanguination. The operator suspended diving operations temporarily and implemented additional shark watch procedures before future diver deployments. A policy change that cost nothing and came 11 years too late for Joren. This is exactly why commercial surface supply divers are among the highest paid workers in any industry on Earth. You are working blind alone in water that doesn't belong to you. next to animals that don't negotiate. So I'll ask directly, do you think it's worth it? Now, this next one didn't happen underwater. It happened in a pet store, which is probably the last place you'd expect someone to die like this. It was January 22nd, 2014, inside a narrow service corridor of an independent exotic pet store on the west side of Jacksonville, Florida, where the only camera angle that mattered was already recording, and the only person who could have stopped what happened next had already decided he didn't need to wait. Jonathan Dempsey was 31 years old and had spent the better part of 6 years working with reptiles, first at a herpetological rescue in Gainesville, then at 2 licensed exotic dealers, before landing at this store on Blanding Boulevard. He knew the animals by name, by temperament, by feeding schedule. Although skilled, his supervisor had flagged him twice in the previous year for attempting large constrictor maintenance without a second handler present. That Tuesday afternoon, his co-worker, Marcus, had stepped out for a lunch break expected to last 30 minutes. Jonathan was scheduled to wait. The enclosure housing the store's adult reticulated python, a female estimated at 18 feet and just over 160 pounds, required routine cleaning and disinfectant wipe down. The snake had fed 4 days prior and had been largely stationary since, tucked into the rear hide box. Now, this is just my personal speculation, but Jonathan likely read that stillness as passivity. He began the cleaning anyway. Reticulated pythons are the longest snakes on earth, and adults of this size are unambiguous ambush predators. They do not telegraph movement, they don't rattle, hood, or vocalize. What they do is wait, and when they move with a mechanical efficiency that outpaces human reaction time at close range. A snake this size can initiate its first constricting loops in under 3 seconds from a strike position, and once the first loop clears the shoulders, the outcome changes entirely. The store kept a laminated handling protocol on the wall beside every large constrictor enclosure. It had been there for 2 years. The snake had been described by at least one employee as more active whenever the enclosure was opened during recent maintenance. I don't know about you, but if I'm ignoring warnings that are literally hanging on the wall, I've already made the biggest mistake. Security footage shows Jonathan propping the enclosure door open at 1:14 p.m. and turning toward the utility shelf to retrieve the disinfectant spray. The python exited the enclosure in under 12 seconds. By the time Jonathan turned back, the snake had already made contact with his lower back and right arm. The first coil went across his torso before he could step away. That 12-second window is terrifying because I know none of us would react fast enough. What followed was not a struggle in any dramatic sense. It was a compression sequence, methodical and incremental. The footage shows him reaching backward with his left hand toward the snake hook mounted on the adjacent wall, roughly 3 feet away, but the coil across his right arm had pinned it partially to his side. Each time his chest expanded on an inhale, the snake tightened. That is not instinct or aggression on the python's part. It is simply biomechanics. The animal responds to pressure. Every breath Jonathan took gave the snake a cue to add tension. Within approximately 4 minutes, the range of motion in both arms had reduced significantly. He was still upright, braced against the utility shelf, but his movements had slowed. His mouth was open. The footage shows no visible attempt to call for help. The compression across his diaphragm made full vocalization impossible. I can't imagine realizing I'm running out of options while nobody else is even there. The python began repositioning its head and tightening its coils for a more secure hold. Marcus returned from lunch at approximately 1:23 p.m., entered the corridor, and immediately exited to call 911. Firefighters and animal control arrived in 9 minutes. Jonathan could not be revived. The coroner's report listed cause of death as mechanical asphyxiation secondary to constriction. The footage was taken by authorities. The family requested for it to be destroyed after the investigation. State inspectors cited the store for repeated violations of 2-person handling requirements for giant constrictors. The business closed permanently 4 months later. If you've been a long-time follower of this channel, you'd know that overconfidence is a slow and insidious killer, precisely because it never feels like a flaw. It feels like earned experience. That distinction cost Jonathan Dempsey everything. Meanwhile, the next victim saw the problem, made a decision, and walked straight into danger himself. It was November 3rd, 2019, in the Jinja district of Uganda, and the sugar harvest was running 3 days behind schedule when a veteran pump operator stepped into a canal he had cleared dozens of times before and did not come back out. I'm already on the edge because anytime a story starts with a harvest running behind the schedule, you just know human judgment is about to take a backseat to panic. Tavon Kiza was 47, a commercial irrigation pump operator with nearly 2 decades on sugar plantations across eastern Uganda. Supervisors pointed to him during worker inductions as an example of how to operate without being told twice. He was months from retirement, planning to buy a small plot of land outside Jinja once his pension cleared. His youngest daughter had just started secondary school. Keep in mind that he was not chasing anything. He was just finishing a job he had done for 20 years. That's exactly what makes this so terrifying. Routine is supposed to protect you, not set you up for a monster's lunch. That morning, a dense mat of aquatic vegetation, papyrus offcuts, and surface algae pushed downstream by overnight runoff had lodged against the canal's intake grate, slowing pump output during the most critical week of the harvest cycle. That intake zone, with its consistent organic debris and reduced current, was precisely the kind of margin a large crocodile would exploit. I'm sitting here thinking, that's not a maintenance issue, that's a predator's buffet table, and nobody saw it. Nile crocodiles in the Jinja district are not a theoretical concern. Adults in the Victoria Nile Basin regularly reach 14 to 17 feet and exceed 1,000 pounds, with a bite force estimated between 3,700 and 5,000 pounds per square inch, the highest of any living animal. The plantation had a designated maintenance platform built specifically for clearing debris without entering the water. However, workers had gradually fallen into the habit of entering the canal because it was faster than positioning the maintenance platform, and supervisors had allowed the shortcut to become routine during harvest. Tavon took a metal clearing bar from the pump shed, stepped into the canal where the mat had pressed against the bank, and waded forward until the water reached his knees. Co-workers on the opposite bank watched him bend toward the grate. Within seconds, the floating mat closed around the lower half of his body, and they lost visual contact. Imagine watching your co-worker disappear in real time and knowing there is absolutely nothing you can do. I'd be screaming myself hoarse. What happened next took less than 4 seconds to initiate. A large crocodile, positioned beneath the surface mat, surged explosively forward and clamped its jaws across Tavon's upper torso and left shoulder. The bite force was sufficient to fracture the clavicle and compress the rib cage on initial contact. He produced one cut-off shout before the animal dragged him laterally off his feet and into deeper water. 4 seconds, that's all it took to erase 20 years of experience and a man's entire future. Co-workers across the canal began shouting immediately. 2 men grabbed rope from the pump shed and threw it toward the mat, but the distance was too wide and the surface too obstructed for contact. The crocodile performed multiple axial rolls beneath the vegetation, a behavioral mechanism used to submerge and disorient prey, and the water around the mat darkened briefly in patches before clearing. Within 90 seconds of the initial strike, the canal surface had settled completely. The mat drifted slightly downstream. There was no movement, no further sound, and no visible sign of either Tavon or the animal. Supervisors contacted local police and wildlife authorities within minutes. Partial remains were recovered from the canal bank roughly 400 yards downstream, approximately 3 hours later. Death was ultimately ruled accidental. Now, to me, this entire incident is a brutal reminder that normalizing unsafe shortcuts around apex predators is one of the most expensive mistakes a workplace can make. Taven never even saw it coming. The vegetation hid everything until it was already over. But for our last story, it happened under fluorescent lights in a controlled research facility. It was May 27th, 2012, at a primate research facility in Ghent, Belgium, and the impending doom was silent, waiting behind a climbing structure while a young woman prepared to break the one rule that mattered. Her name was Nora Claes. She had graduated 11 months earlier with a behavioral biology degree and had been hired in that facility in late March. Competent by every evaluation, reliable, and genuinely invested in the work. Her supervisors described her as quick to learn and eager to prove it. Her role that morning was routine: clean the primary enclosure while the facility's alpha male chimpanzee, logged as subject K7, was held in the adjacent transfer pen during the transition window. She had completed the same task 3 times before, never alone. However, her assigned co-worker had stepped away for a moment to retrieve fresh bedding materials, and Nora began the cleaning procedure before the second staff member returned. Look, I get wanting to impress your bosses, but rushing in alone with a dominant chimp is an ambition. It's reckless suicide. The Veldenberg facility's primary chimpanzee enclosure occupied roughly 1,400 square feet of interior space, with climbing structures, rope lines, and observation windows along the north wall. Adult male chimpanzees in captivity regularly exceed 130 pounds and possess upper body strength estimated at 4 to 5 times that of an adult human male. They do not attack the way dogs do. They engage with hands, feet, and teeth simultaneously, maintain grip, redirect force, and target the face with documented specificity. I don't think enough people truly appreciate what a chimpanzee is physically capable of until they hear facts like these. K7 had no prior recorded aggression towards staff, but had been assessed as dominant and visually reactive to less familiar personnel entering his space. Now, no prior aggression is meaningless to me. Dominant and reactive is a recipe for disaster, and that's all I need to know to keep my distance. The transfer protocol required a mandatory visual confirmation eyes on the animal through the observation port before any enclosure entry. The step took approximately 15 seconds. Lift a metal cover, wait for K7 to move into visible range, log the confirmation. Nora did not complete it. The facility's CCTV captured a 12-second interval between her arrival at the enclosure door and her entry, far shorter than the required confirmation procedure. She carried a mop handle, a bucket, and a spray bottle. K7 was not in the transfer pen. He was behind the interior climbing structure, and she walked in anyway. The incident investigation later determined that both the missed visual confirmation and a transfer door interlock that had been temporarily placed in manual override during maintenance contributed to the enclosure entry. If you ask me, multiple safety layers only work when every single one is respected. She was roughly 8 feet inside when he charged. K7 covered the distance in under 2 seconds. The impact knocked Nora sideways. He bit into her right hand, the one she raised instinctively, and the audio captured the sound before the image made sense. 2 fingers on her right hand were partially amputated in the first 15 seconds. Bones audibly compromised. She moved toward the exit. K7 pulled her back by the arm, repositioned, and bit into her left forearm. The spray bottle skidded across the floor. Nora was dragged back. Each time she moved toward the door, the animal repositioning its grip with a kind of deliberate efficiency that I think most people are not prepared to understand about chimpanzees. By the 3-minute mark, the observation windows were crowded with staff who could not enter. Adjacent chimpanzees slammed enclosure barriers and vocalized at a pitch that filled the corridor. The laboratory supervisor activated the emergency protocol. Veterinarians began preparing tranquilizer equipment. None of it was fast enough for what was already happening inside that room. This is the part that always sticks with me, because you can have trained people doing everything they can and still be completely outpaced by reality. K7 was sedated after approximately 7 minutes. Nora was still breathing when paramedics reached her, but she had already suffered catastrophic blood loss before transport could stabilize her. She died at the hospital approximately 40 minutes after arrival. Death was attributed to hemorrhagic shock secondary to multiple severe bite and crush injuries. Findings included partial amputation of 3 fingers on the right hand, compound fractures of the left forearm, and extensive soft tissue avulsion of the nose, lips, and both ears, with significant facial bone fracturing. The injuries were determined to be non-survivable. The facility immediately suspended entry into the chimpanzee enclosures, while occupational safety authorities, institutional investigators, and veterinary staff conducted parallel reviews of the incident. If you ask me, the saddest part isn't just how this happened, is that someone so young, with her whole career and life ahead of her, never got the chance to see any of it, and I think that's what makes this incident truly heartbreaking.